I want to thank everybody for attending the next iteration of the NANS Education Committee Business Series. Today, I have our leader and host, Rudy Malil. Rudy is the president of Pain Management 360. He's also the president of WVSIP and the new Appalachian Pain Conference. Rudy, I'd like to go ahead and give it to you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mark. So thank you all for attending this conference, and thank you for the panelists for also joining in. So Mark reached out to me not too long ago to talk about this topic of what does one do after fellowship, or what does one do after being in practice, and trying to figure out, is private practice one of those things that they should do? You know, is a hospital base, is work RVU something they should do? And developing a panel to talk about that. So right now I'm going to talk to you and introduce our panel. We have a diverse group from different parts of the country, actually. We have, I'll go from top to bottom here, Rani Abdullah from Delaware. So I'll give a quick introduction, and then I want you guys to actually talk a little bit about, you know, when you started and then how you got to your private practice. You know, you don't have to go into much detail, but tell us a little bit about, you know, are you anesthesia, are you PM&R, et cetera? And then, you know, what'd you do after fellowship, and how'd you get to the point you are today? We have Dawn Sparks. She isn't currently in Ohio, but she is from Hawaii. We have Ken Chapman from New York City, and we have Jackie Wiseman from California. So who wants to introduce themselves first? I'll say Ronnie.
All right. Yeah, so Rani Abdullah, I am about 7 years in practice now. I anesthesia-based, Rush University, University of Pittsburgh Fellowship. Then I was in academia for about 4 years. Kind of wanted to get out of there and start my own practice at the time, but literally a week after I left academia, COVID came about. So I joined a big group, and then a year and a half later, I left and started my own practice within 2 years of that. So I've been with my own practice now for 10 months, and things are going great.
Jackie.
All right. I'm Jackie Weisbein. I practice in Napa, California. So I did my residency in physical medicine and rehabilitation at SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn. And then I did a fellowship in pain management at Virginia Commonwealth University. And as soon as I graduated in that summer of 2012, I drove across country and joined a practice out here in Napa. I was in a private solo pain practice, so just a couple of pain provider physicians and also like NPs and PAs. And then after 5 years, I left that practice and I started a private practice at the orthopedic group, and I'm now a partner in the orthopedic group. So happy to talk about that.
Dawn.
My name is Dawn Sparks, and I started my residency in 2004 at the Cleveland Clinic, and then went on to do pain management fellowship there as well, just after Ken Chapman. And I went on to work in academia for a bit, and then moved around and landed in the beautiful island of Hawaii in a small private practice, to which I then started my own practice in Kauai, and it's now been there almost 6 years.
All right, Ken.
All right, I guess that leaves me. Well, I guess I'm sort of I've become the elder statesman of this little committee we have here, and it's funny how life turns like that, right? And it's almost like when I watch the movies now, I no longer relate with the up and comers, and I'm more like I more feel for I'm no longer Simba, I'm no longer Creed. You know, I'm like the old guy telling everyone else what, you know, how they should work or do to succeed in life. And so, you know, I finished my I finished my anesthesia training in New York at Columbia in 2005. I went to Cleveland Clinic in 2000, finished in mid 2006. back in those days, there really weren't many private practices around. It was sort of like the Bronze Age of pain management. And essentially there were really no jobs. No one was hiring. I could have worked at Columbia. They were offering $150,000 salary of anesthesia attendings at that time. And I decided to just hang my own shingle. And so that was now 18, 19 years ago. And the practice has grown over that time. And we have, I would say, maybe 6, 7 doctors. I don't even know exactly, 7 doctors and about 7 mid-levels, and maybe 6 or 7 locations through New York. That sounds great and everything, but it's really, really not. And, you know, I guess I'm here to kind of give like a perspective of what it's like after you decide to do it and put it all on the line and see what it's all about at the end. All right. And so, you know, thank you guys for allowing me to be here. Thanks, Rudy. Thanks, Mark, and everyone else.
Perfect. So I'm going to start off with the questions. You know, I think one of the things that we want to sort of talk about is how do you even go from thought to conception of actually this topic, right? So or to starting a practice. So Ronnie, what is the first thing that you did? Did you consult a lawyer? Did you talk to you know, your friends? Did you call Ken and say, am I doing the right thing? So what'd you do?
I did. And he said, don't do it. But that was like 10 steps before so essentially, I mean, I still remember the exact time I decided. I was at NANS and in Orlando at the time, and I bumped into you know, one of the leaders in the field, and I asked them, and you know, the first thing is that people are going to get a million pieces of advice, and every advice is going to be different based on, you know, what people are going through. And so essentially, you know, fast forward about 6 months to a year later, you know, I started like, you know, putting everything on the ground. And the first thing you need is you need to have you need to have an entity, or nobody will talk to you. So essentially, you need to make sure that you hire a CPA, or if you yourself have time, create an LLC. And as small as these details are, and I could, you know, just, I'm going to go on a tangent a little bit. Make sure you have an address, you have a phone number. The address can be your home if you don't have anywhere, but make sure you have a phone number. Make sure you have, you know, these small things so that you can have, you know, a business, a tax ID number, because nobody will talk to you without that. It's like going to buy a car when you don't have a social security number. And the phone number issue, I really feel like it's important, because I started this company with my cell phone number, and I literally a year later, I still get phone calls from insurance companies to my cell phone. So these small things are important. And if you don't know where to start, there's one thing that I've learned, and that's a little bit later, is that every state has their medical society. And these medical societies will actually have, I wanted to actually display that, but it's copyrighted. Essentially, Medical Society of Delaware has this, you know, 10-page long of step-by-step things to do. They're very vague, but they at least give you a little bit of a platform, you know, to rely on. You know, I could go on and on, but I think that that's, you know, the first thing is just create an entity, hire a CPA, hire a lawyer, make sure that you're started. And one thing you have to start really quickly is make sure that you have, you know, you start your credentialing process. So when I was doing all of that, I kind of put that a little bit behind me. And I think that it was about 3 months in when I started credentialing with insurances. And that pushed me 3 months behind in getting paid by insurances, because I wasn't credentialed with everybody. Sometimes it takes about 9 months to even get in with Blue Cross and so on and so forth. So be wary of these things.
So if I hear you correctly, it's create the corporation or the PLLC, talk to a lawyer prior to get that ball rolling, talk to an accountant to make sure you're doing everything correctly as well. Get a cell phone or get a proper phone, which I did too. I didn't do actually as well. So I do get those phone calls as well. And and then move forward from there. The credentialing thing you can't do until you start all that stuff as well. So they do need a
Absolutely.
tax ID. They do need a corporate entity, PLLC, if that is what you have in your state. So,
Right.
and after COVID, everybody is working from home. So this credentialing process is a lot slower these days versus, I don't know how it was a few years ago, but that's what I'm hearing from a lot of people. So,
But yeah, the issue with the credentialing process, and I don't want to go into too much into it, is during COVID, they credentialed everybody, kind of without going into the details, and now they're going back to actually doing their due diligence with all the people they credentialed during COVID. So you're kind of really behind the 8 ball there. So you need to make sure you start that process really quickly.
one thing I will add to that is be involved with that credentialing process as much as you can, just because if you're leaving this to other people, we're physicians, we want things done at our pace, and that's rather quick. So if we're leaving it to someone to have on their desk, you have to really, really follow up on this stuff. So perfect. So I guess I'm going to ask you, Ronnie, one more question is timing. One of the biggest things that I think of in any practice is not just, are you a good physician? Do you have enough money in the bank? Do you have, a good legal structure? Do you have a team behind you? But really, if you started this practice, like you said, a few months earlier or a year earlier, that would have been very detrimental due to COVID. But, so how big was timing for you? Did that help you? How did that play into your role?
Right. So essentially, there's timing and there's supply and demand. Essentially, I'd see if you had started this in December of 2019, you would have been quite in a little bit of a pickle, depending on where you were in the country. Because in some areas, pain doctors were still considered essential. So in Delaware, really nobody really had a major issue. But if you were, in other places like New York or what have you, you probably had quite a bit of a problem. Another thing that in my opinion is paramount is everybody wants to be, in the happening places, but at the end of the day, everybody could drive anywhere. Essentially, you want to make sure that timing is also contingent with where you're going. So if there is a place that you can drive half an hour where there's very minimal pain doctors or very minimal pain doctors that do what you can do, then that is extremely important in my opinion. And so make sure that you do your due diligence in terms of, is this the right time for me to start in this current area? Because where you plant your flag can be detrimental to your future.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to touch on, just real quick before I ask another question to another panelist is before we really kind of dive into this private practice world, which I think, us as physicians, going through all of our training, we didn't really learn a lot about. What are the options out there after fellowship, right? So, we have working for a hospital-based system. You have your work RVUs, which you can make. You can do academic, which again, there's different models on that. You can work for, say, the VA. It's pretty much straight salary. Then you can work for that. Then there's working for a private practice, and then starting your private practice. So those are a big spectrum on how you could do things. I think the hardest thing is what we're all going to talk about is starting your own practice and taking that leap and when to do it. I think all of us had done it at different points. Ken, you sound like you did it right from the get-go, but none of us did that. Right. So I think that's a little bit of a difference. I think maybe that was you were in a different pickle in 2006. Like you said, that wasn't something that you could just join a job, work that job for a while, and then jump out and have that be feasible. So, I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way. So, I guess the next question is, I guess I'll go into this. So what do you do?
Hey, Rudy, can I just, before you get it, Rudy, Before you get into that, I think just to touch on what you were saying, sorry if you hear some banging in the back. I have a Great Dane puppy that's making noise, so I presume that's coming out. But I wanted to just say, for anybody that's early in practice, I see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list. So hello to all of our colleagues. But if you are someone that's just, leaving fellowship training and looking to what to do, and you're like, I don't know what to do. Actually, there was a book that Jason Pope and Tim Deere edited called Year One of Practice Transition. And I actually wrote the first chapter on like how to figure out, like, do you want to do private practice or do you want to do this, and kind of some things that help you kind of identify like where you might fit. And so while Ken did have to kind of navigate the Wild West of, starting private practice right off the bat, and there are a lot of people even today that still do that. And I think Ronnie's idea about like making sure that you find an area that maybe is not so saturated is a really great place to start. It's also important to understand like the kind of person that you are when you're thinking about how you want to work, right? So if you're someone that doesn't work well under like high stress, high pressure, and like you're going to need to produce, then, starting a private practice by yourself or working for someone who's going to make you work on production is probably less ideal. And you might be better off in like Kaiser or a VA place where you might have the opportunity to work a little bit slower because you don't have the volume to dictate how quickly you need to work. You have a little bit more time to kind of feel comfortable independently doing a lot of these procedures. So that book is called Year One of Practice Transition. I think you can buy it on Amazon, and expensive there, and it should be cheaper other places. But that being said, it's like a really great book of kind of how to transition your practice from fellow to, no longer being a trainee. Sorry to cut you off.
Awesome. No, it's perfect. So I guess the next question is, I kind of leave this open, and whoever wants it, because I think we all sort of did. Who had a side job, before we start our practice? We're obviously not going to make money for a short period of time, correct? It takes a little while for that money to come in. We may have some loss at the beginning, and that's the biggest hurdle that a lot of us have. So did any, I have one currently as I'm building my practice, but does anyone have a side, or did they start with a side job at the beginning to either moonlight or do a locums job somewhere else in their primary specialty, whether it's, I'm doing pain, whether it's anesthesia, PM&R, pain, or something else to make ends meet at the beginning?
So I did both. I did locums for pain management and for anesthesia, because when I was first starting my practice, I knew that there was going to be some time, as you said, like I started the credentialing process while I was still working for someone else. And I continued to do all of that stuff as much as I could on the DL while working full time. But it still does, it's a lengthy process. And then using the EHR and getting the biller and getting everything situated, it was taking time for the money to start coming in. So I found it really useful to kind of just self-negotiate for locums jobs as opposed to going through a recruiter. So both my jobs in anesthesia locums and pain management locums, I negotiated myself, and I think you end up happier, and there's less whatever red tape you have to go through. If you've ever worked a locums job before with a company, it's not exactly the best thing. So if you can negotiate something with locums one-on-one with somebody who needs help, or somebody comes to you and actually asks you for help, which is how it worked out for pain management for me. But then for the anesthesia part, like you can just negotiate stuff there. It's in high demand. I'm not really sure about like PM&R or how that would work, but if you can stay away from a locums company, I worked for one of them after my academic job, and that was not a fun time. So.
Gotcha. Anyone else?
I started actually locums before, as I was transitioning into my private practice, and then currently, if you are an anesthesiologist getting out of fellowship right now, it is the golden time. The rates are quite lucrative. So even if you work 20% of anesthesia, you could pay your bills and do that. So I personally still do some weekends. and intermittently weekdays. And it's been frankly, a blessing. And so my advice is, first, make sure that you understand how long you will not be making money out of your practice, and that is quite a long time. So essentially, the average, the data shows somewhere between 6 to 9 months to kind of flip, turn the corner. And to start making a doctor's salary, it could take a couple of years. So you need to make sure you understand that before engage, and make sure that there is some sort of other revenue coming on, consulting. But if you are an anesthesiologist, there is no need to go anywhere further than that. You just do a little locums. Right now, I get 10 phone calls a day, to do that. Locums companies, I haven't had any bad experiences, but I do agree with Dawn that if you reach out to, pretty much now every hospital has a need. So if you reach out to any hospital and put your number down and tell them what you need, they will usually say yes.
So I'll ask somebody else this, but I know Ronnie, you probably dealt with this, but a line of credit, starting a practice, we're going to incur a lot of expense at the beginning, and people want their money before we get obviously our money coming through billing and credentialing. So I guess Dawn, who do you talk to? How does that work? How do you pay those bills? How do you ask for a line of credit, and what is that?
So I just want to make sure I understand your question correctly. You want me to explain how you ask for a line of credit,
or like where do you
pay the
start? Because a
bills?
lot of people may not know what that is, and actually where that comes from, and how much, I guess not how much capital that is, but
Okay,
basically
because
it's a
I
loan.
didn't get a line of credit straight out of the gate, and I don't
Okay.
know many banks that would give a line of credit straight out the gate when your business hasn't made any money. So that part, I'm not sure how that would work, but you can get one later once your business is making money. Certainly you can go to the bank and you can ask for a line of credit. And if everything's good and your business is showing promise and they've looked at your bank statements and things like that, they will extend you a line of credit. And that is kind of like just another loan, right? So if you use the money, then you're going to have to pay on it every month like you would a loan. And if you don't use the money, it kind of just sits there like an escrow account, like in case you need it for a rainy day. So that's that point. And then as far as for a business loan, I think at the time that I was going into business, I just looked into the rates and what was out there, and who could get me the money kind of the quickest at the point when I started to need to spend money, which became very apparent very quickly. And then I went for the lowest amount that I could take out, because I don't know, I like living on the edge. Not really, but I just thought I don't want to take a big loan if I don't have to. So how much can I actually not have to take? I've heard of some people who've started their practices and took out like $1.5 million. And I really wanted to avoid that. So I took out what I thought I could get away with at the smallest amount possible. So it really depends on what your comfort level is with how much money you want to be indebted for to somebody, and then just how quickly you think you can turn over. And I was fortunate enough that I had been at that place where my private practice is for about 2+ years, and I was only paying doctor there, so I kind of felt like it could flow pretty easily. So that was my personal experience.
Awesome.
How about 10 in New York City?
So, Ronnie said something earlier. Listen, if you're not doing something else on the side, you're not going to break even to whatever job you were going to take for 2 or 3 years. So, that being said, there are many benefits to working on your own from a financial aspect. But, my practice, so just, you can just walk into a bank and show them you're an MD and they're going to give you $25,000 loan. And I personally took, I think like another 75,000, total about 100,000, 1.5 million. I don't know what that guy's doing. I'm in New York City. You started on $100,000 and I got a rent now. It's like 30,000 a month. So, it's, you don't need a ton of money. You got to have the heart, the desire, you got to want it. And for those of you that are on this thing saying, I'm logging into this webinar because I want to go into private practice, you need to look yourself in the mirror and say, am I meant for this? Because it's not an easy life. It's tough. You got to deal with getting screwed over every second, slapped in the face, cheated on, lied, stolen from. And it's, but you have your independence, and that means a lot. And so, the price of freedom, there is a price with that, essentially. And, that being said too, I think for those of you that are on this webinar that are younger, it really starts with your training. You want to come out and you want to be ready to rock and roll. If you come out and you can't do an RFA, don't go into private practice. You're not doing our field a favor at all. So if you don't feel like you got the training, get the training before you open your practice, because it's just what you're going to have to offer is not a good product, or you're going to be learning on the fly. And I don't know if that's right. So just make sure your training is good, or you're going to the courses and you're putting in your work, because that's going to give you the confidence just going in to talk to patients, to say, hey, how you doing? I know we've been open 2 weeks, but I'm going to take care of you. And it takes a degree of confidence that you have to get from your own ability. All right. So that's just also something to consider. But you can do it, and just be ready to, just be ready to not be bringing home a big paycheck, I guess you could say, for a couple of years.
Okay.
If sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to quickly say, I agree with Ken. Learn pain first, right? Because we don't learn everything that we can in 1 year. That's just too hard. Our field's too big to do that, and we have to be proficient in what we do before we hang a shingle outside and say, hey, we could do this. So if you can't, unfortunately now with how things are, if we don't do it efficiently, or we don't know what we're doing, it's just going to be very hard to make money. So anyway, sorry, Ronnie.
No, absolutely. I just, I think I'm the latest person who's walked into a bank asking to get a loan for a practice. So I kind of wanted to give that image to everybody around. And I think in the past couple of months, banks have completely, transformed. So I'm not sure if what I'm saying is even current, but currently, if you walk into, like, a few years back, if you say I'm a doctor, they just give you your money. Right now, there's kind of you have to have a business plan. If you don't know how to make a business plan, there's stuff online. If you have a good CPA, they'll help you with a business plan. So nobody's really, just giving you money because you're an MD. The average amount, if you have to give a 2-year projection plan and what you're going to spend literally on every single thing, including cleaning and all that stuff. So I spent like a couple of weeks, doing this together. And usually they give you a capital, which is anywhere between $300,000 to $400,000, and they'll give you some working budget as well, to be able to pay your staff. And that's not money they give you. You have to present every single one of your bills as you go along. And when that money dries out, there's things that you could do to get a little bit more money. But essentially, you have to have all your ducks in a row before you start and walk into a bank. They'll say, hey, there's $10,000 on a credit card, and I'm like, I didn't even know I needed to pay attention to that. So you need to make sure all your ducks on a row, like as if you're going to buy a house. So make sure if you're thinking about it, make sure all X, Y, or Z, and don't buy a new car today and all that stuff. It's literally like you're going to buy a house. So you need to make sure that all your financial ducks are in a row if you want to walk into a bank and get a business loan.
Awesome. Yeah. So I did get a line of credit at the gate, and I had to pay for a lot of stuff, but I burned through a lot of my my actual capital, my own, to start the practice as well. So I think there's different types of banks that we could all talk to. There's big corporate banks that we know the names of. And then there's smaller banks in their area, and those are probably the ones that you want to probably start with at the beginning, just because they're a little bit easier to talk to. They don't have to go to a big entity at sort of in a different state to say yes to a loan. They'll understand what you're doing. They understand what you're doing for the community, and they may help you. So I think a lot of us, except for Ken, had a different job prior, and I think as some of us alluded to, we stayed in the area that we were. And I wanted to talk about, we all have from our first job a non-compete that is in our contract, and I think we're so scared about that at the beginning, and sometimes you should be, and sometimes you may not have to be. So first, I'm going to start with Jackie, and I know you know a lot of information about this, so I'll let you take that topic.
Let me see if I made sure oh good, I muted myself. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure the dog noise in the background. But anyhow, so one of the most important things to do when you are thinking about joining a practice or any job, whether it's a hospital-based job or a private practice, is to make sure you have an attorney who is going to read your contract. And that attorney shouldn't be like a friend or family member who happens to practice like, some kind of estate law in another state. That's not helpful for you. You need someone who is a business lawyer in your state to review it. And I can tell you from my own experience, when I was leaving my old practice and joining this new one, I had my accountant in California read it. I had an attorney in California and my dad in Florida, who's an attorney. And the three of them did not agree on the verbiage of this contract that I was signing. And I was like, hey, these guys have been together for a long time and they all like each other and things seem to go pretty well. So I'm just gonna do it. But I came from a practice where when I was signing the original contract, there was a non-compete, and the non-compete was pretty substantial. It was like 50 to 70 miles in a radius around it. But that was in California, and California is a right to work state. So even if you put a non-compete into the contract, it's not enforceable. So when I left that practice, I actually had to do 4 months at that previous practice while I was transitioning. And during that time, I set up my practice in the orthopedic group half a mile down the street. And I didn't worry about any kind of non-compete. Now, non-compete and non-solicitation are two different things. So non-compete might not be enforceable in California, but a solicitation could be enforceable. So if I solicited any of the employees that were at my previous practice during that time that non-solicitation agreement was in there, I could have been sued for that. But the reason that I'm super passionate about this is because some of you may or may not know if you follow any of this stuff on regulations.gov, but currently the Federal Trade Commission is actually trying to implement some big changes regarding non-compete nationally. And right now it is a forum that is open to public comments. And so I have shared the link for this with Sylvie, and she'll email it to everyone at the end of the meeting. But realistically, if you're interested in making sure that like down the road, you don't have this as a problem, and you might think it's only a private practice thing, but let's say you join a hospital right out of training and that hospital has a non-compete and you now live in this little town and you're super happy and you love it. And then you and the hospital decide to separate, but there's a non-compete of 100 miles. Well, guess what? You're going to either be commuting outside that 100 miles or you're going to have to move somewhere else. So if it's important to you to know that you might be able to stay on that you live in or where your family is and you're not sure, I encourage you to go and read about what's going on in regulations.gov. But that being said, again, make sure that you have an attorney that is licensed to practice business law in your state, review your contracts so that you understand what the limitations are. I know that, like, for example, Ken lives in New York, right? And so if you work in Manhattan and you have a non-compete that's 1 mile and you want to practice in Manhattan, that means that you may not be able to open another practice in Manhattan if you have that non-compete built into your contract. So, it's really important. In Napa, that would be very difficult for me if I had to leave and drive somewhere else because there's all these like 1-lane highways coming to Napa. So understanding like the layout of what's happening in your life is important, thinking about how that's going to pan out down the road if you do change jobs. I mean, they do say that your first job's not your forever job. And I think, except for Ken, that's probably true for everybody. So
50% of people leave their first job. 50% of physicians. It's a huge number.
I've heard it was even higher.
And there was a question. There was a question in the Q&A that about touching on equipment leases, rent versus buy, et cetera, companies. So absolutely, I'd love to comment on that because when I was moving to this new practice, I was joining an orthopedic practice and they did not have any pain management set up in there. And I was like, okay, I want to do stim and pump and kypho. And I want to do all these things in my office and Botox. And they were like, what? We only know how to fix fractures here. And so I had to set all those things up. And so I went to one of the stim companies that I was really working a lot with. And it turns out that a lot of them have things like lease to own programs for generators. So if you're looking to buy like your radio frequency generator, that's something that you can negotiate with them. And it's usually like you buy a certain amount of product from them over a course of time. And that way you don't have to like kind of come out with a big amount of money, because as you heard, there's a number of issues with trying to get those loans. Additionally, you know, if you do work with some of those companies, I can tell you, like, for example, Medtronic, I'm not promoting them, but they'll tell you like, oh, well, we have this deal with buying C-arms, and, you know, but the reality is understanding like what your needs are first. So, you know, you might be like, oh, I'm ready to build a procedure suite, but you may not really have been credentialed for Medicare yet. And that means that you may not be able to see any of your Medicare patients. Or that's probably more of a priority than, you know, figuring out where do I buy a C-arm. But there are also a lot of business business loans. There's even like some doctor to doctor lending stuff that you can get loans for once you've been in practice for a little bit as well. So if you're stressed, or even like Ronnie was saying, and also Rudy, you know, there are a lot of like credit unions that are much more supportive to smaller businesses in your community. And so those are also good places to look for getting some of your equipment loans and leases. I don't know if, I mean, the rent to buy, I don't know. I think that it just depends. I mean, a lot of the things are very expensive and there's technology changing all the time. So it's just a really hard thing to say like, oh, I'm 100% going to buy this, because if you buy it and it gets, you know, a new model comes out the next year and, you know, you may not have the ability to turn around and sell it to upgrade. So what did you guys do, like Rudy and Ronnie, when you were starting your practice with regards to buying equipment versus leasing?
Ronnie, I'll let you do.
Go ahead. Would you? Yeah.
I'll
So
let you do.
I personally, you know, so let's look at a C-arm. So everybody who's doing pain management doing C-arm. So buying a refurbished C-arm versus buying a new C-arm could be a difference of almost $100,000 if you're, you know, you know, looking at a GE, let's say, right? So I would say if you want to rent to own, that is a potential. But essentially, essentially, if you buy a refurbished C-arm from the get-go, you would save yourself, and they come with a warranty and everything. So I decided to do that. I also bought my own ultrasound. And got a deal on a RFA machine, a brand new one. So essentially, you have to decide what you want to do from that standpoint. The C-arm models, there are models that are coming down the pike, but essentially, unless you're doing a vascular procedure, you really don't need, you know, your flat top, you know, GE that's $180,000 plus you have to. You get a 9800 or something like $70,000 to $80,000, and they themselves can't finance it if you don't have a loan. So essentially, I decided that was the route I was going to go, and it's been working out really well.
Awesome. I know there's a bunch of questions. Some of them are, what's the best way to start the credentialing process with insurance companies? There's a lot of companies. I'm going to jump into this, and there's a lot of companies that are I think they still text me randomly. I don't know how they found me, but they text me, they say, I can credential you, each insurance X amount of money. I think if you find someone who's trustworthy and that they have a good track record, I think I would just do that. But know that what's going to happen is you still have to be on top of everyone in that. Going a business plan templates, there's probably, like Ronnie said, online. Talk to your CPA, look online, or ask any of us. I think we should, if you know us on the outside, or if you're able to have our contact, then you could ask us and we could try to help you out a little bit, or someone who's done it, not just pain, but there's other specialties as well. I want to jump into it went by so quickly. That's awesome. There's so many other topics that I want to talk into. So when does one, I guess, decide to have a partner or a mid-level? Ken, I think you've been in this for some time, and you've had a long experience, and I'm sure you've done things that you probably would have changed, right? But you still did it. So in your experience, what is the time to start to add a mid-level? What's the time to add a physician?
Okay, before, I just want to add one thing before that I'd like to say. Do you rent or lease your car?
Rudy.
You lease it, right? You lease it, right? What if you could buy it at the end for $1? That's pretty much how all these leases work. So if you were gonna, I personally, if you have the upfront capital, because you're paying, listen, right, at $300,000, I mean, nowadays you're paying 7-8% on that, and so, you could lease to own, and at the end you can buy it out for $1. For those higher ticket items, I would really consider that. And especially in the concern of buying older stuff, is older stuff breaks down, man. You're buying someone else's stuff that is broken down already. So just keep that in mind, because when you see arm breaks and you got to pay like $15,000 to get it fixed, you're going to be like, why didn't I get a new damn C-arm? So that being said, as far as when it comes to adding to your group or growing your practice, again, we're taking a business approach to this and looking at the numbers, but in reality, and I'm a big proponent of advanced practice providers, because we need physician extenders. We can only see so many patients, and many of our patients don't always need the level of care that we need to be there directly providing. So my advice, I say the same thing to everybody. When I have a medical student come into, or someone that wants to go to medical school, I try to talk them out of going to medical school. When I have someone that's, applying for, anything, I would just say, stick with mid-level providers until you can't do more than you can do, because hiring in more physicians, don't think it's just more, it's great to have the camaraderie, but from a financial aspect, the same way that all of us on here didn't make money for the first 2 years when we were new physicians, if you bring a new physician on to build and grow or develop a new area, you're going to lose money on that physician for at least a year, if not 2 years. So unless they're walking into someone that left the practice already. So physician extenders, all the states are a little different on how many you can have. And I'm not saying, we want NPs instead of, or PAs instead of physicians, but, especially with COVID, I think in New York, you can have 4 with you. And I'm not saying to get 4, I don't have 4 personally, but it's physicians are always, they're going to lose money for you for 2 years. And as soon as they make money, they're going to want every cent of it. And so just make sure that that physician is needed. And that it all adds up.
Ken,
Gotcha.
you're making it sound like that no other doctor, once they hire other doctors, and they should just, and I know that I would say a good rule of thumb is that if you're this and you're by yourself, you're at practice and a half, is when you should start considering hiring an advanced practice provider. The reality is, though, is like if you're going to open a satellite office, or you are waiting like 3 to 6 months to see new patients because you're that backed up, then it may be a good idea to bring on another physician. Ken's shaking his head, but he's in a unique situation, right? He's in New York now. Anyway, so that being said, there are a lot of questions in the Q&A, and some of them are regarding insurance and credentialing. You do not need to be board certified to be credentialed. You should be, I think, board eligible, but even that, you can get certified for board eligibility through like the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons. If for some reason you weren't able to like get board certified through your own board, you absolutely should have some kind of address. I don't know if I would put my home address as my credentialing, but Ronnie and Rudy might be able to comment on that. The reality is that you're worried about ancillary revenue with a new practice. Yeah.
No, essentially, if you have so I just transitioned to a new address, and so if you do have you had it in some address, so I agree, I wouldn't put my home address because it's going to be a disaster, so you need to have a
And
physical
for
address.
the
If
DEA,
you're
it's
transitioning to
illegal
a
to
new
put your
address,
home address.
that also
Yeah.
has to be credentialed, and it takes a couple of months for things to grow there. So try to have as soon as possible a physical address, even if it's, as soon as you sign your lease, you just start credentialing.
You can easily get another phone added on for the different phone number that you want as your business phone number, like at Verizon, and then have it on a cell phone, and then easily transition it to Ring Central or something different to keep it for your business phone, because they have all the voice over internet phones now. And you can't use your home address for the DEA purposes, and that's going to be part of what you're going to need for credentialing as well. So you want to keep it all legit. So even if you have to get some sort of UPS box at first until you find an actual lease for your space, you should have an address.
All right,
And-
real quick. Sorry, I know you guys. We could go on with this topic for a while. I want to spend 2 minutes on two topics. 2 minutes on marketing, and how to do that, and what are the options of doing that. Jackie, I don't know what you've done or what you haven't done. So, can you talk about 2 minutes or less than 2 minutes on that topic?
I sure can. Absolutely. So obviously left one practice in my community, went to another practice. So people already knew who I was, but like, why would I send me patients at my new practice? And the reality is that I basically made like a little card with my picture that I do. And then I personally, when I was not that busy, when I was staying, because, I was still getting credentialed, all those things were changing. And remember, I had to leave one practice where I was still actively practicing and starting to set up stuff. So it's kind of difficult to get credentialed while you're practicing somewhere else and trying to move everything. But the reality is that I went to every doctor personally because I had a lot of time in the beginning, and I went in the morning and brought some coffee for the managers or like some macarons that I got it like in boxes and masks at Costco, and I wrote a little handwritten thing with business cards like, hey, I'm here, would love to like meet with you for coffee when you have some time, because I didn't expect them to like step out of their practice. But I also hosted some dinners, and I kind of rebranded the topics like, new and innovative treatments for chronic post-surgical pain. So I was able to invite some other physicians who like didn't really come to other things when I was at my old practice. One of the things that someone talked about was closed panels. So if you are trying to go somewhere where there's closed panels, like for example, Florida, some of the ways to get around that are by joining an existing practice, even if it's like a 1099 or like partnering with someone else. So for me, I joined a practice that already had existing things. So sorry, that's my puppy. So I was able to get on a lot of their credentialing much easier, even though a lot of it was completely different than what they were doing before. But I think, if you're in a place where you have the ability to do some direct one-on-one, going to their office, and additionally maybe having some like local referral dinners, those can always be really healthy ways to, and looking in at those places and kind of reigniting some of those conversations with people you may already know.
Perfect. That was awesome. I agree with a lot of that. Dawn, I just want to touch 2 minutes or less than 2 minutes on ancillary sort of revenues that you've heard about, you've used, or you've started.
So of course, you can always go into doing DME, and like as a pain physician, obviously having back braces or TENS unit, those are all kind of the DME things. And as long as you've got all your ducks in a row and you're getting paid for them, then it's definitely helpful, and they help patients, and they provide some extra income. As far as for things outside, you can have cash pay services like regenerative medicine or PRP or stem cells, or I guess we're supposed to say biologics. But all of those things can also add some cash pay services that you can do in your office as well. You can get very, very familiar with the Medicare forms, and you have them sign a waiver, and sometimes patients want something, but you have to be careful because it's fraud if you have them pay cash and their insurance will pay for it, or you'll have to pay them back. So you have to know all the rules around that. And then there's also like nutraceuticals and things like that that are helpful as far as supplying people with stuff that we would tell people to go and get anyways outside. Like if we're going to tell patients to go get magnesium, why shouldn't you be able to have them take magnesium that you would be somehow making some money from? And it's not considered a kickback in the way that you do it. We can talk about that offline if you need or have any questions about that. And then there's other things like if you wanted, some pain doctors do aesthetics and they want to add that into their practice, which could also be cash pay. But overall, it's trying to find the balance of what you want to do, like how much cash pay stuff do you want to do in your practice and how much you want to balance that in. Because if you're looking at a more holistic point, these are things that would be helping people anyways, especially in the longevity medicine and helping their lifespan and their functionality for the long term.
Perfect. I'm at 2 minutes for Ken on two different topics. One is tax benefits and just a gist, like, you know, obviously we're not accountants and I know, you know, we rely on them. What are the tax benefits of being an employed physician or being a solo practice or a practice owner? And then I think that and what are you've been in this, you know, you're the you tell people to do it, not do it. Give us the 1 minute spiel on not to do it or to do it.
Not to do it or to do it. Well, let's start with the first part, and that's the tax benefits. And so really what that comes down to is that is a benefit of being a private practice physician, the owner or the owner of a practice, as opposed to being in a center or hospital or something. Is, you know, there are obvious tax benefits as far as what you're doing in life that gets to be written off. There's the difference between a 1099 employee and a W-2 employee. That's something that's very important as far as the people you have working for you, because there are very strict points that you have to meet to be a 1099 employee. And what that is, a 1099 employee is an independent contractor. So what that means is that you can write things off that you do, right? So like if I have a doctor that works for me, I can't make them a 1099 employee because, you know, they're an employee. That's a W-2. So, but the unfortunate part on that person's side, the W-2 employee, is that you can't write off as much. You can't write off as much because it's all baked into your W-2. As far as going into private practice, listen, I've tried to talk a lot of people out of a lot of things and no one seems to listen to me. So what I would say is, if you want it and you really want it, then go for it. And, and there's people here, all these people come to these meetings, talk to people. Everyone's here to help you, and they'll tell you, why reinvent the wheel? Ask Ronnie, so that's what I'd say.
Awesome. Ronnie, one of the questions on the panel was, how big of a space do you need? Anyone could chime in on this, but since you just started, and built 3 different offices recently, what were you looking for with the space? I think you're on mute.
So Ken answered and said you wouldn't need more than 1,500 square feet to start with. I must have splayed way more than that, but essentially you need a 2-3 exam rooms, a procedure room, and a waiting room. So essentially 1,500 square feet to 2,000 square feet should be enough for you to start. The question is, are you going to outgrow this or not? So you have to understand where you're starting and how long you want to rent. Because if you want to rent for the longer lease you sign, the better deal you get, and you will get actually something about 30% or $30 to $40 per square foot to build out your office. And so if you sign a 10-year lease, they will give you that. If you sign a 2-year lease, they won't give you that. And then you'll have to build it out yourself and get out of it 2 years later. So essentially, I personally got a bigger space that I will stay with for a while, potentially extend. So essentially you have to decide how long you want to stay in that area, or, some of the, most known people in the space have told me, like, you don't have to have the Taj Mahal when you start in a small office, and then you move to another area. And so you have to decide these things. But, if you want to start where, to be risk averse and make sure that you succeed, then you keep your overhead low. So 1,500 square foot, 2,000 square feet should be plenty. And I agree with Ken on that.
Perfect. Last topic is EMRs. We all probably use different EMRs if we use EMR at all. Dawn, you talked about, we talked about EMRs offline earlier. How did you choose yours, and what did you go through, and what have you done?
Well, this was all again when I was still at the other practice. I was like interviewing EMRs and doing like their little practice run to like take a look at all. So I looked at a lot of them, and it was just, it's very overwhelming when you're already working full time. You're trying to get your credentials, you're looking for a space, you're doing all this stuff, and you're looking like you're going to choose which EHR are you going to choose. And you have to be careful because some of them will sell you the sun, the moon, and the stars and promise you everything and tell you that it'll all be, they can do everything. They're all inclusive. And then you find out once you're in there and you're seeing all of your, you're building your practice and you're seeing more and more patients and you're just seeing everything sit in a whole bucket and nothing's getting paid and you're like, what's happening? So all of these things you have to understand kind of ahead of time. So what I ended up ultimately doing is I went with one EHR and I didn't like it. And I know some of you guys use the EHR now. So I won't mention who it is. I'll talk about that later. But I ended up going with two separate ones. Like I ended up having Collaborate MD now that does my billing, and then a separate EHR to actually do my notes. And it was very much geared towards an interventionalist. So if you find an EHR that works well for orthopedic surgeons or works well for ophthalmologists or dermatologists or people who are doing a lot of procedures and seeing a lot of patients, that it's probably going to be an easier base EHR. And I just didn't want, like, they talk about death by 1,000 paper cuts. Well, death by 1,000 clicks can happen too if you're in an EHR and you feel like you're trapped in front of a screen and trapped with the EHR all the time. And then if you can find one that can by an HLA7 connection or something like that, that can go directly to your whatever you're using for your business side and all the processing and stuff, then that'll help you a lot for keeping things a little bit more smooth.
Perfect. So I think one of the things that I learned starting a practice is that everybody comes out of the woodworks and wants your business. One of the businesses is billing companies. Ken, do you want to talk about in-house billing versus working with a billing company?
Yeah, I thought this was worthy of bringing up because this could be the end of like every single person that tries to open a practice. And this is something that we're going through tremendously right now. It's hard to find good people, no matter what you're looking for. And with billing, it's the same thing. And with billing companies, it's absolutely the same thing. And then it's how much do they want to take. So, I mean, if I could answer this in really quickly, I would say in the ideal world, we would all have in-house billing with a superstar billing manager and a great team around them. But it doesn't work like that. And finding people that know what they're doing, it comes at a premium, and even at a premium price, they may not even be good at all. So, I would say my advice for someone starting a practice is to look into unless you have a trusted right-hand person, I would look into an outsourced billing company. And there are some that are well-known in the space that you could look into, or you could reach out to the panelists on here. But, again, we are currently outsourcing and we've gone in and out many times. It's just, it's a tough nightmare actually. And so
But I think
something to keep in
the
consideration.
other thing too is if you don't know anything about billing, then you also need to take a billing course, because if you don't have any that you might be losing where. So
Right.
there's tons of billing courses out there. I mean, I was really fortunate in my fellowship. One of the guys was an attending, just like joined the fellowship. And so he went to a billing program and then he created a billing for the fellows. So I got training in billing as a fellow. And I know that's really unique, but there are tons of opportunities for you to learn. And if you don't know what the things are, like if you don't go to the cms.gov website, know like what each CPT code is going to reimburse you in facility or in office in your MAC locality, and you are a practice owner, then it's going to be really hard for you to understand where you might be losing money. Anyhow, there are tons of billing courses. I think I just sent my biller that is in house to the new Society of Pain Management billing one in thing that was like in Vegas, but there's a ton of options. I think ASIPS has some too. I don't know if NANS has one. I know it's something that is really important. If you don't know about billing, you should absolutely start doing that right now, because otherwise you can't really be in private practice. And if you're leaving academic practice or a VA or something like that, and you don't know about private practice, how to bill and things like that, it's going to be impossible for you to keep the lights on.
Yeah, if you lose 3 months, you lose a lot of money in 3 months if you don't know what you're doing. We have, I think, 14 seconds left. Anybody else want to say anything? Or we just say, I want to thank everyone on here. I think everybody, we could do this, I think, for 2 hours, but I think we all have to go to our respective homes. So thank you all.